Good evening and a very warm welcome to African Perspective, the show that brings you the news from around the African continent and issues that affect Africa. Now, today on the show, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo comments on South Africa's land policies. We also look at the impact of the COVID-19 coronavirus in Africa, and we also look at the situation in Zimbabwe. I'm Peter Ndoro. Now, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says that South Africa's plan for land reform, which may involve expropriation without compensation, is a bad idea. He was speaking at the UN Economic Commission for Africa in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, where he laid out the US policy for Africa. SABC's Coletta Wanjohi reports now from Addis Ababa.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is taking aim at South Africa's proposed land reforms outlined by President Cyril Ramaphosa in his State of the Nation address earlier this month.
South Africa is debating an amendment to permit the expropriation of private property without compensation. That would be disastrous for that economy, and most importantly for the South African people. Socialist schemes haven't economically liberated this continent's poorest people.
In 2018, U.S. President Donald Trump claimed South Africa was seizing farms and that many farmers were being killed. Secretary Pompeo has been on an official tour to Africa, during which he chose to visit Angola, Senegal and Ethiopia, which was his last stop.
The three countries I chose were all at unique moments in their own development history. Very different cultures, different parts of Africa, different histories, but in each case too, real leaders who are prepared to do the right things to help their countries move forward. And when I say real leaders, that certainly includes political leaders, but it's broader and deeper than that. It's the wellspring of the population who's demanding these changes, these transformations, whether that's in Senegal or Angola or here. I can see it, I can feel it, I can hear it. Leaders in the business community, leaders in the entrepreneurship world, finance leaders, non-governmental organizations who understand that the things that have been done in these countries in the past didn't deliver the outcomes that these people so richly deserve, and are determined to push back where there were problems with corruption, who are determined to deliver these outcomes, and are prepared to take real risk to get these fantastic outcomes for their own people.
The U.S. Secretary of State also took questions from the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa.
You have gone to three countries that are working very hard on trying to ensure that they can forestall corruption and track resources. What do you say, and how can the U.S., with your experience, help us to improve this fight on illicit financial flows? We do need to stem it.
I think the world has made progress. I frankly think Africa has made progress as well. The leaders that I spoke with in every country all took on board the desperate need they had to control that illicit financing. They see it, they see that it escapes their capacity to control. They know that it's bad for their people. They know that it deteriorates from their tax base to generate even further opportunity for their people. Each of those negative ramifications are serious matters. We're committed to it. We will come to countries when we provide foreign assistance, and we'll often come with technical help. In addition to the resources, the money, we'll embed members of our team in financial institutions or in central banks or in other governing agencies, law enforcement, the equivalent of our Justice Department, who work on these illicit cash flows, or finance ministries. We'll put our people, our technical know-how. These are complicated issues. They are international issues. They extend far beyond the borders of any one country. We collectively have to get it right. I spent a lot of time when I was a CI director working on the information side of that, to make sure that the data set was available. I haven't spent as much time working on the regulatory piece of that, but I know the United States is committed to that, and it's important to get right here in Africa.
This is your last stop before you leave the continent. Tomorrow, the G20 Ministers of Finance and governors will be meeting to talk about the state of the world. What is the message from Africa that you would send to them?
There is enormous opportunity not only for Africa here, but for the world. This is a continent that is growing. It is a continent that has been behind the power curve in its capacity to achieve all of its opportunity, not only the economic opportunity that we have spoken to, opportunities for religious freedom, opportunities for all of the things that humanity cares so deeply about. I would urge them to recommit to this, and we'll have massive economic benefits to places like the United States of America. If we get this right, the young women that I was with this morning were all exporting to our country. What does that mean? That means that someone in America decided that there was a value proposition to purchase that product that was made right here in Ethiopia. The seller benefited here in Ethiopia, and that American consumer benefited as well. That trade, that commerce, that opportunity will benefit our entire world. We need to get it right here as well. And when we do, it's mutually reinforcing too. Economic growth and security are mutually reinforcing. If we get the economic piece of this right, there'll be fewer folks that decide they want to go create unrest, cause trouble, create problems for nations. So we've got to get them both right. I hope those ministers will all take seriously what I saw on my 3 visits here in Africa.
The U.S. says Americans are interested in investing more in Africa, but need reassurance about security and transparency of African government policies. The U.S. Secretary of State has discouraged the African continent from depending on foreign aid, but instead grow to self-dependence by encouraging its own private sector to invest more in the continent. Coletta Wanjohi, SABC News, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Africa on Friday confirmed its first case of COVID-19 coronavirus in Egypt, whilst health experts have been fearful of what could happen if and when the disease got to the continent. The Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Africa CDC, says that the country was able to detect the patients, and this shows that it is prepared at points of entry. Well, this week, the continent continued to ramp up its surveillance capacity at points of entry. Sarah Kamani has been following the story.
At the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, only 3 African countries, South Africa, Cameroon and Ghana, had laboratories with the capacity to test samples for the deadly virus. A collaboration between the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Africa CDC, the World Health Organization, WHO, and African governments has changed this state of affairs. Now, 21 laboratories in Africa have the ability to test for COVID-19.
Diagnostics is the cornerstone on our ability to rapidly detect and rapidly respond.
The trade links between Africa and China have put the continent at a greater risk of the virus spreading into the continent. African airports, like the rest of the world, have introduced mandatory checks and screenings for all passengers entering their territories. Over the past 2 weeks, the WHO has held trainings in Kenya on detection of the virus for airport personnel. The WHO has identified 13 priority countries.
The full week is mainly focused on the countries which has a lot of interaction with China, a lot of travelers or goods coming from China, or they are located as a hub for the international travelers. So we have identified 15 countries. We got other requests from other countries to be included and with high priority. So I think the total number of the countries being trained during this week is 18 to 20 countries, mainly the big international air hubs in Africa.
The idea is to, as much as possible, keep the virus from entering the continent due to Africa's inadequate health infrastructure and personnel.
The training this week is mainly for, to strengthen surveillance at the point of entry. So we have a profile of participants from Ministry of Health, from also the airport, and then the civil aviation.
It is to remind them of the state responsibilities, the state preparedness to deal with any communicable disease imported through the air transport.
Crucial because of the close economic links between Africa and China. There are currently 8 direct flights daily between African countries and China. At the moment, African national carriers, including Kenya Airways, Egypt Air, Rwanda Air, and Air Tanzania, have suspended flights to China indefinitely. Only Africa's largest carrier, Ethiopian Airlines, is still flying to China.
We have Chinese coming from China to Cameroon. We have Cameroonian students living and studying in China. We have businessmen who go to China to buy goods and come back to Cameroon for sale. So I think that even if we don't have that much interaction as other countries, there is traffic between China and Cameroon that should warrant us to take measures for prevention and maybe respond if any case happen to be detected in Cameroon.
One is recommending that we close the borders neither for travelers nor for goods. So if some airlines or countries are closing the borders, this is like a decision made internally, but not according to any recommendations from our side.
By Tuesday, China had reported over 1,800 deaths following the deadly outbreak. Sarah Kimani, SABC News, Kenya.
Zimbabwe's opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, says that he will not join the country's political party dialogue started by the country's president, Emerson Mnangagwa. The forum is aimed at trying to find solutions to the challenges that Zimbabwe is facing.
The US dollar is the currency that is being used everywhere. Even when you look at the pegging of prices, they are being pegged at the US dollar rate. Certain service stations are already selling fuel at US dollars. Government is transacting in the US dollar. Mr. Mnangagwa is carrying the US dollar in his pocket. And so is everyone in government. So we don't want to live a lie. And this is part of the biggest challenge our country is facing. We seem to thrive on institutionalized dishonest and taking lies to be our modus operandi. Why should we pretend that the RTGS is the currency of choice, when in fact the currency of choice is the US dollar? Some of the distortions we are seeing are on account of this denial of the reality that is on the ground. We just as well have to have this bridging of the barrier between government and the people. The people are very clear. They are using the US dollar. Yes, to dialogue. Mr. Mnangagwa has spanned the offer by President Beki to mediate between the two of us and to mediate between ZANU-PF and MDC. And I have to tell the National Council, which is the supreme decision-making body of the party, to say that we have tried this route, but we are not having our goodwill gesture being reciprocated. They have the audacity to say they will not have another platform outside dialogue. We must also boldly state that there will be no genuine dialogue outside a credible dialoguing process between ZANU-PF and MDC. The rest is a waste of time, a sideshow, a public relations exercise to hoodwink the international community and the people of Zimbabwe that something is happening and that people are talking, when in fact it's not dialogue but monologue. The fact that we are speaking at cross purposes, ZANU-PF on one hand saying this, ourselves on the other hand saying something else, tells you that things are not okay. Zimbabwe is burning. And I've told SADC that the danger with burning Zimbabwe is that it will set ablaze the entire region. This crisis is going to affect the entire region. And we've said we need mediation. That's why we need a mediator who is credible, who is preferably with stature that would give credibility to the dialogue. Not this Muppet show that is taking place. If they were serious about Poland, why are they proceeding to have amendments that are not shared by all the players? Assuming that, yes, forget about Chamisa, because they minimize this national discourse. It's not about Nelson Chamisa and MDC. It's about the people of Zimbabwe.
Welcome back. You're still watching African Perspective. Now, Zimbabwe has signed up for the African Peer Review Mechanism. It's hoped that the country will, for the first time, open up for assessment. At the same time, the country is lobbying support for the removal of targeted sanctions that have been imposed on some of its leaders. Now, the other challenging issue is the economic situation in the country. To talk to us a little bit about these issues, we now have the spokesperson of ZANU-PF in South Africa, Kennedy Mandaza. And we're also joined by Blessing Vava, who's the regional coordinator of the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for inviting us.
All right, so Zimbabwe is one of these stories just keep on rolling year after year. Players change, but the situation somehow stays the same. So let's start with the Reserve Bank Governor's monetary policy statement that was issued this past week. What does it tell us about the economic situation in the country? Let me start with you, Mr. Mandas.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope I will be able to do justice to the issues that are at stake. The Reserve Bank Governor issued up the monetary policy statement, and in it there are a number of areas that he touched which seek to address the current challenges that the Zimbabwean people are facing. And when we go through the monetary policy, you will see that whilst the government is in progress in what they've been doing in order to make sure that the fundamentals that are supposed to be there to kickstart the economy, they also admit that there are certain issues that have not gone well. And among them is the issue of confidence amongst the Zimbabwean people who have not accepted the changes that have taken place in the country. And we also see that this confidence, the lack of confidence that the majority of the Zimbabweans have stem from the fact that in the past certain things have gone wrong. And the inflation that we have seen is as a result of the perceptions that the Zimbabweans have and the lack of confidence that they have in anything that the government seeks to address. And as a result, the Reserve Bank Governor has said that in order for us to attend to some of these deficiencies that we are beginning to see, or which we have seen for a long period of time, there is need now for us to go to make sure that our communication lines with the people of Zimbabwe, wherever they are, they have to be improved. So one of the things that they've cited that they would want to do is to address the issue of the confidence levels of the Zimbabwean people.
Okay, so as far as you're concerned, it's all in the mind.
It's all in the mind.
Do you agree with that?
Well, certainly I don't agree. But going back to the monetary policy statement, I think there are very key issues that were raised by Dr. Panonetsa Mangudya. I think firstly is an admittance that the economic trajectory that the country is taking is failing. For instance, he indicated that the foreign direct investments inflows have dropped, from 717 billion to around 259 billion, which shows you that things are not well. The Zimbabwe open for business is certainly not working. And secondly, also indicated the industrial utilization capacity that it also dropped from 36% to 27%. And the industries in Blawa, there was an article also that came out recently about 95% of the industries are closing shop, that is in Blawa. And also the figures from the Reserve Bank Governor, thirdly, he also mentioned the annual inflation, which is now pegged at 500%, which is quite shocking. And the other issue that he also mentioned is that only a very few people are controlling our economy. He mentioned of $35 billion that is in the hands of only 200 people, which is quite shocking. So in a nutshell, we can say that the monetary policy statement as presented this week, it shows that it's a gloomy picture for our country. Now we're faced by an acute shortage of power, 18 hours without power, and in some instances it goes for days without electricity. You talk of fuel shortages that is continued unaddressed, and it also shows that we don't have a solution to that. Apart from that, recently, if it was yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, where some millers were complaining about the corruption scandal that is happening at GMB. The country is facing food shortages, there is subversion, but we have millers, we have been taking maize that is provided by government, that is meant for the consumption of the people and is being exported to countries like DRC, Mozambique, and the other countries, which shows that Zimbabwe is in deep crisis. And only if President Mnangagwa, one, they stop, they change the economic policy framework from the neoliberal policy framework that the government has embarked on, which has totally failed, to a more social, democratic policy in line, kind of economic policy framework.
Mr. Mandaza, why aren't people investing in Zimbabwe? You keep on saying confidence, but some of the issues that we're hearing here, corruption, that's man-made. That's an own goal. Grain Marketing Board capping prices at levels that smallholder farmers just can't afford to, so they don't bother producing. There are more farmers, but less production of grain. How can that be?
When we look at farming, I think we need to also admit that in the past seasons, things were not okay, and the drought has played havoc to the harvest that we expected. And we cannot also wish away the issue of climate change. And that in itself has a part in terms of food security.
If that was true,
yes,
then all the countries in Southern Africa would be affected in the same way. Zimbabwe's situation is uniquely bad in comparison. Climate change has affected the entire region, but the other countries have managed the situation. Why has Zimbabwe failed?
We are not saying that the issues of corruption that have been raised are not existing. These issues are existing. But we need also to admit that the current president in the new dispensation, they've put in place structures that are meant to address the issue of corruption. But corruption had gone so entrenched among the majority of the people in Zimbabwe. Not only in government, and it also goes as far as the public sector. And the general public are also participants in the corrupt activities that are taking place in the country. And it is only when all of us as a collective, as Zimbabweans, embrace the issue of doing away with corruption, because it will not only be the government that will stop. The government can arrest as many people as is possible. But we as Zimbabweans, wherever we are, it could be in the informal sector, in the formal sector, in government and so on, we must take a step to make sure that we address the issues.
Do you know of anyone who's not a political enemy who's been arrested for corruption?
Who is not a political enemy?
Yes.
Corruption does not target political enemies. Corruption targets it targets people who are corrupt. Okay. And what is needed in order for us to make sure that we attend to this issue, because corruption has its own challenges. And one of the challenges that many people have met is the issue of coming up with the evidence that incriminates those that would have been cited to be corrupt. And the president, even ZEC, and other institutions in the country have said that bring the evidence to make sure that we attend to corruption.
Mr. Baba?
Yeah, I think Comrade Mandaza is just being economic with the truth here. Well, we have seen that ZANU-PF has adopted a catch and release, strategy, in that of Mnangagwa's naming and shaming of what he termed economic saboteurs. If we ask today what happened to that list of names of people who were also implicated in illicit financial flows, he appointed ZEC, and several officials have been arrested. That includes Minister Mufumira. But up until now, there has not been any conviction. We know of the ZANU-PF Youth League that have come out, to mention some of the corrupt bigwigs in ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF only, set up a committee that they said was going to look into that issue. But up until now, nothing has been done. And there is also an admittance, from Tsenengamu and Matutu, their recent press conference where they were complaining that they have brought the issues to the party, they've brought the issues to the president. But what was the result? It resulted in the suspension of those two, those two young leaders of
So would
ZANU-PF.
people be arrested with no evidence?
I think I need to correct one issue with regards to the naming and shaming that have been taking place. I think one of the issues that you've spoken about is the issue of Comrade Senengam and Comrade Matutu. They made, out of their own volition and on their own, they went to name and shame people. And this was not brought to the attention of the president per se anywhere else. They did that, and one of the reasons what our party did was to say that the platform that you have used, according to what we have told you, you should have gone with the evidence to ZEC, to NPA, and the police. And that is what is expected that everyone else should do. Once you have evidence, take it to the police or to
Mr.
ZEC.
Mandaza, is there nobody in ZANU-PF hierarchy, government hierarchy, who's corrupt?
I don't have evidence of anyone who is corrupt. Neither can I say there is no one who is corrupt. If ever there is anyone who is corrupt in ZANU-PF, there is need for us to prove that with evidence, to say that here is so-and-so who is corrupt, and this is what they have done, and this is the evidence. But when we come up and say, Comrade so-and-so and so-and-so, they are corrupt, honestly, without coming up with the evidence, that will not see the test of time when it goes to the through the criminal justice process.
The amounts of money that have been stolen, I can't think of a better word, are so big and so great that surely there must be a trace of evidence somewhere.
I think it's difficult to fight corruption in Zimbabwe because Emmerson Mnangagwa is the mother of corruption. He was mentioned, during the Robert Mugabe, how he squandered, how he misused, ZANU-PF funds when he was the Secretary for Finance in ZANU-PF. And, his involvement in the illegal gold mining activities, especially around the Razara Midlands, and also his proximity to, Kudata Gwire, who's also being accused of, capturing, the state. And we know Kudata Gwire, he was one of the guys who was, funding Command Agriculture. He was the man behind Command Agriculture. And Command Agriculture has been, named as one of those, platforms where there was massive, corruption that was happening. And recently, the Prosecutor General, Hodzi, mentioned to the effect that it's difficult to fight corruption in the country because it seems like every sector has been captured. He mentioned the judiciary, he mentioned the Constitutional Court, he mentioned the media, he mentions the government. So it's difficult to fight corruption. And only if our president was not corrupt, I think Zimbabwe would have, dealt with these issues a long time ago. But we've seen that corruption is being used as a way of, targeting, political opponents, as you have mentioned earlier, in the case of Mufumira, in the case of Superman Dwanzira, and all the other guys who have been arrested but no conviction.
Very quick comment, because we've got to go to the break, yeah?
But the comment that I want to make is that mentioning the name of the president is like saying, Peter, you are corrupt. If I say, Peter, you are corrupt, that does not make you a corrupt person. We can go up the mountain and say Peter is corrupt. Until such time I've brought evidence that you are corrupt, that's when people will see that you are corrupt. So all these names that are thrown left, right, and center, the issue is evidence. Bring the evidence to justify the naming and the shaming that people
how do you know there's corruption?
This is what people have been pondering. They will be shouting all over.
So there's no corruption in
No,
Zimbabwe?
I'm not saying there is no corruption. The issue is, once we decided to name an individual, let us come up with the evidence.
Okay. We're going to take a break. When I come back, I want to talk about the dollarization of the country. That's what the Reserve Bank governor is saying, that he's happy with the process. It may take up to 5 years, we believe, to come right, but we'll explore what it means and how it's affecting the people of Zimbabwe right after this. Welcome back. You're still watching African Perspective, and we're exploring the situation in Zimbabwe at this time. The Reserve Bank governor in the country issued a monetary policy statement, and in there he spoke about the dollarization of the country, where the US dollar was banned, as well as other foreign currencies such as the rand, and a local currency was introduced. We're also hearing that higher denominations of this currency are going to be introduced during the course of this year, and some people are starting to get a bit nervous because this is what we saw back in 2008. All right, gentlemen, let's talk about the dollarization. Reserve Bank Governor Mangudya is happy with the progress with the dollarization, but when it was introduced, it was 2.5 to 1 US dollar. In a short space of time, it's collapsed to 28 to the dollar. Is it working?
It's very difficult to say that it is working, but let me say that there is every reason why the Reserve Bank decided to introduce monocurrency in Zimbabwe. But the challenges that are there stem from the fact that there is a lot of mistrust, and the issue of confidence level come into play. The people of Zimbabwe have failed to accept their own currency. And what we have seen is that every corner in Zimbabwe, there are people that are selling foreign currency. So it is true, yes, that the majority of the people have a strong appetite to the US dollar and at times the rand. But we must also admit and get to a point where we say that we need our currency. And what the Reserve Bank has decided to do now, to go all out to conscientize people on the need for them to accept their own currency, I think is the way to go. And given that it is going to take 5 years, according to the Reserve Bank governor, I think they have seen that there are enormous challenges in as far as the issue of de-dollarization is concerned.
People warned that this wasn't going to be an easy journey, and they said that perhaps they should hold off de-dollarizing the economy. What's your take now, a few months into the process, and we're seeing inflation at 500% plus? Has the dollarization worked, and what's it doing to the average person on the street?
I think, to be honest, what's currently happening in Zimbabwe is that people are transacting in US dollars. And you know that only early this week, Mtulingwe, the Minister of Finance, released a statement that the Zim dollar is still the legal tender, and the US dollar remains banned in Zimbabwe. But only a day after Mangudya released his monetary policy statement, we have seen companies like Zuva, for instance, because also of their proximity to the head of state, releasing a statement that they now have some, they will now be selling their fuel in foreign currency.
But that's against the law.
Well, but these are companies that are closer to the president, and everywhere you go, in most shops, the dollar is still the US dollar. People are still, trading in US dollar. But answering that question, you'd realize that I don't think that our government has an appetite to reform, to initiate, currency reforms, and also because of the black market and majority of the people that are forex illegal forex currency dealers. If you ask them, they will tell you that Tapua begi, Panamdaro and beg, which means that all those monies, if you go to 4th Street, for instance, you would see every morning brand new currencies, and you would wonder where are those notes coming from. But, for us to be able to undertake proper currency reform and for economy to improve, I think we must not run away from the fact that we have to address the political question. There is no doubt now that Zimbabwe is faced by a political crisis, which the European Union recently released a statement to say that Zimbabwe needs to address the political.
What is the political crisis?
And the South African Minister of Foreign Affairs, Naledi Pandor, last year said that it is now time that we have to accept that in Zimbabwe there's a crisis, and that crisis is emanating from political crisis.
What is the political crisis?
The political crisis it's based on the reforms. Remember that Zimbabwe came, it experienced a military coup in November 2017, but the inclusive government of President Mugabe and Prime Minister Tsvangirai had failed, to adequately address the issues of the reforms, the electoral reforms, the media reforms, that have remained sticking issues to address for Zimbabwe to be able to be that country that we can say Zimbabwe is now being governed democratically. And you know that now ZANU-PF is talking of Constitution Amendment number 2, already when we have not yet fully implemented the Constitution. So those are some of the kind of things that you would realize that they will remain sticking issues.
Mr. Mandeza, why is government so dead set against a mediator coming to talk between the parties?
All of us in the political arena have admitted that the Zimbabwean problem requires Zimbabwean solutions. And if we have admitted that it requires a Zimbabwean solution, one of the solutions is to make sure that we sit down together and discuss. And that is why the president came up with Pollard, to make sure that all political actors, regardless of the size of the political party, should come into the House and discuss the challenges that are there.
Is it an unreasonable request to have a neutral referee?
It is not unreasonable. But when we do so, there should not be any conditionalities. And there have been so many conditionalities that have been given in order for one political party to join the dialogue. And we believe that there should not be any conditionalities for any political party, because the current government is there legitimately. After what happened in 2018 and going through the courts, it was affirmed that the current president won, and there should not be therefore any talk of legitimacy on the current president. And anyone else who therefore decides to come and take part in the political dialogue should do so knowing that there is a president, and that president is there to run the country for the next 5 years. And as a collective, as Zimbabweans, we need therefore to put aside our egos and say, whatever I have, if I have interests for the people at heart, it does not need one to be in power in order to further those interests.
So, Mr. Vama, what I can see is that MDC is saying, listen, we won the election, we're not going to sit down unless there's a neutral referee. ZANU-PF is saying, we won the election, we don't need to have a foreign referee because this is an internal problem, and you can only come to the table if you acknowledge that we won. Can this impasse be dealt with?
I think that looking from either sides, both ZANU-PF and MDC, we can see that these are parties which do not have the interest of Zimbabwe at heart. What we want to see is an all-inclusive dialogue. The fact of us going back to the elections, I think we need to look forward to say that what is it that has been the point of contestations with regards to our situation in Zimbabwe. We realize that these are the reforms that have remained sticking. The reforms in the political, the reforms in the economy. Those are the only things that I think that Zimbabwe should be united to tackle, not to say that to remain clogged in the elections of 2018. I don't think that the country will be going forward. But we seriously need an all-inclusive dialogue, and that will not just be a dialogue between political parties, but a dialogue that should also involve the churches, a dialogue that should involve the trade unions, a dialogue that should involve the young people, because Zimbabwe does not belong to MDC, Zimbabwe does not belong to ZANU-PF, and Zimbabwe does not belong to Poland. But Zimbabwe belongs to all of us and the future generations.
Just a quick one, Peter. ZANU-PF did not set any conditions for anyone to come to Poland. It invited almost everyone to join in. So the onus is on the people that have been invited to come to the party to make sure that they discuss the plight of the Zimbabweans.
Mr.
And
Mandela,
they are doing so genuinely to make sure that the Zimbabwean quest is put forward. So anyone else who has decided to stay outside of the political dialogue that is currently...
But it's not helping, that's the thing. Either way,
the reason why it is not helping, it is because there are people that are outside that would want to be dragged into the political dialogue on their own terms, which is not...
there is no sincerity. If you look at the reasons why ZANU-PF and specifically Mnangagwa set up Poland, it was done not for the local audience, but it was done for the international community. You know of ZANU-PF's efforts of re-engaging the West. So they pretended that there is dialogue. And remember that it was also one of the recommendations of the Motlanthe Commission to say that after the shootings of July or just the day after the election, that Zimbabwe must find each other. So instead of Mr. Mnangagwa inviting everyone on the table, specifically they set up Poland, and the framework there is for political parties. And it said that those who participated in the presidential election, those are the people that
we're running out of time. But
Poland.
The reality is 7.7 million Zimbabweans are food insecure. And I've never seen this before. I mean, that people are going hungry in urban areas is also new. What is going wrong that so many people in a country that used to be a net exporter of food are hungry?
There are many issues that needs to be addressed, and among them is the issue of making sure that our industries begin to run. And like what he has rightfully said, from the monetary policy, we have seen that foreign direct investment has declined. And we are not seeing any companies...
Whose fault is that?
We cannot point a finger at an individual to say that, because ZANU-PF, as it stands, it is going all out genuinely and earnestly to call people to come to invest in Zimbabwe.
So why aren't they coming? What's putting them off?
I've already alluded to the fact that there is very little confidence.
Why?
And one of the reasons is that amongst ourselves as Zimbabweans, as one party goes out to invite people to come in, the other party goes out to scare the people. Or a number of people go out to scare the same investors. And it is important that if we need to move the country forward, we need to be together.
We've run out of time, but very briefly, will Zimbabwe pass the African peer review mechanism, peer review?
I don't think that it will pass. Zimbabwe is an example of how bad it is to run an economy. Our politics is bad, our economy is bad. But, this is a trend in many African countries. And it will be shocking to see African leaders bringing each other to account. It will be a first for me.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I think we're going to have this conversation again in the near future. But, gentlemen, thanks so much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, now Zimbabwe's agriculture, forestry and wildlife are being threatened by climate change, as you've been hearing. Poaching now, though, is worsening matters. The depletion of wild animals is a major concern for wildlife authorities, and it's not only affecting the ecosystem, but also the country's tourism industry. The illegal hunt for elephants and rhinos and ivory remains high, and according to African Wildlife Foundation's report, Zimbabwe has lost about 500 rhinos due to poaching in the last 5 years. Since 2013, more than 1,000 elephants have been killed for their tusks, and these worrying figures motivated a young Zimbabwean filmmaker to produce an anti-poaching film which brings to the fore the effects of this vice. Nomabaloni and Effort Msekiwa compiled this report.
The movie is about, it's an anti-poaching movie that looks to fight poaching through the arts. It's locally written, directed and produced with a cast and crew of young Zimbabweans. So we're looking to also showcase our local talent in filmmaking and also showcase the beauty of Zimbabwe.
This was not the life I imagined for myself. But my choices had led me there. And it seemed like it was the end of the road for me.
It's a film about a guy named Zulu who lives a fantasy of an acclaimed musician, but in reality he lives in a poverty-stricken community. He has to find out a way to get out of that situation, take care of his ailing mother, and also coming to terms to realize his dream. And all that situation and his frustration towards life thrusts him into the hands of poachers, who become his new family, and he's part of a vicious group of poachers under the charge of a notorious leader.
The film is set for a world premiere on Friday in Los Angeles. It's already been nominated for the Best First Feature Narrative by the Pan-African Film Festival, which ranks as one of the biggest African-American film festivals in the United States. But for the filmmakers, the journey in making this picture has been an eye-opener.
I realized I didn't know much about poaching. And I know there are a lot of people or youngsters or most Zimbabweans, they don't know much about poaching. They just think maybe it's a white people's thing to take off. They just read about it in the papers. So when I was researching while I was developing the script, I realized it's quite a dangerous field. And to me as a writer, I wanted to tell a story that communicates to my fellow Zimbabweans, like if they are approached next time by someone who might lure them into poaching, having seen the movie, they can see how deep and dangerous it is, because it is that dangerous. Most people don't know it. A person can approach a person living in the surrounding communities like, I'll give you $1,000, come with a horn. They think it's easy, but it's a shoot to kill zone. Most people don't know that. They will just see the money. So this movie takes people through all what is involved. If you want to be a poacher, this is the world that's waiting for you. So that's what I took to come up with a script that can really put fear or instill fear and awareness in the people who are going to watch it.
The reason why I got into this film was it's an anti-poaching film. This thing really kills me when we have, for now, if you ask me that, I don't know if it's a myth when we talk about dinosaurs. And I felt like the next generation is going to come and they say they're going to talk about lion, and they're going to talk about elephants and rhinoceros, where would they say they existed or not? Because right now we don't know. I don't know if it's a myth if dinosaurs really existed. They become extinct, and elephants are going to do the same thing. The rhinoceros is going to do the same thing. And so I just felt like it's a noble cause to be part of this production, and with its magnitude. And I didn't know it's going to go this far, like festivals and all that.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I stand before you as an example.
The cause of anti-poaching goes beyond the film. For Mnangagwa, the daughter to Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa, her fight against poaching is deep-rooted. She's a member of the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, an all-female anti-poaching combat unit.
So I volunteer at an all-female anti-poaching unit. It's known as Akashinga. So that's where I try and help and do the efforts that I can in anti-poaching specifically. But as a whole, I'm very passionate about looking after wilderness areas in not only Zimbabwe but our continent. Because even if we look after, I feel like as though it's a two-prong effect. That if we look after the animals, we also need to look after the area that they live in. Because if we look after the animals and not the area, there's not much we'll have achieved. So both are required. So wilderness preservation and conservation of animals.
The African premiere of the film is expected between April and May in Zimbabwe.
To any poachers who may be listening, to you I say, don't do it. It's not worth it.
Mama Polani, SABC News.
All right, and that's how we come to the end of this week's edition of African Perspective. Aldrin Sampear will be back in studio next week. From us and the team, have a good evening, everybody. The Globe is coming up next.